The night before my wedding, I woke up at 3047 in the morning with my heart slamming against my ribs. Not the nervous kind of waking up, not the "I forgot to confirm the florist" kind. This was different. This was the kind of waking up that leaves a handprint on your chest even after you open your eyes. I lay there in the dark for a long moment, trying to hold on to what I'd just seen. My mother. She was standing at the kitchen table, our old kitchen table, the one with the burn mark near the left leg from the time my brother knocked over a candle when we were kids. She was wearing the blue cardigan she used to wear every Sunday morning. Her hair was pulled back the way she always kept it when she was being serious about something. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she needed me to really listen. "Don't drink what your brother brings you tonight," she said. "Promise me." That was it. No explanation. No story. Just those words and the way her eyes stayed on mine until I felt them in my spine. Then I was awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. 3 hours and 47 minutes before my wedding day. My mother has been gone for 2 years, ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the last morning I sat beside her hospital bed and held her hand while she slept. She was 53 years old. I don't usually dream about her. I've wanted to. God, I've wanted to. But sleep mostly just gives me darkness and nothing. So when she shows up, I pay attention. I sat up and looked around my room. The wedding dress was hanging on the back of the closet door. My maid of honor had ironed it herself the evening before and hung it there before she left, kissing my cheek and telling me to get some sleep. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like a woman's bedroom the night before the best day of her life, but my hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the comforter and took a breath. It was just a dream, I told myself. You're anxious. You're stressed. Your brain is doing what brains do the night before a major life event. I lay back down. I didn't sleep again. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one who taught me to ride a bike, the one who sat outside the bathroom door the first time a boy broke my heart, the one who called me every Sunday after our mother died just to check in. Or at least, that's who I thought he was. He arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony with his fiancée, a bottle of champagne and a smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "For the bride," he said, setting the bottle on the dressing room table. "From the vineyards in Napa. Mom would have loved it." He said it so easily. Mom would have loved it. He said it so easily. Mom would have loved it. I watched his face when he said it and I saw nothing. No flicker. No catch in the throat. Just the smile. I thanked him. I hugged him. I told him to go find his seat. After he left, I stood in front of the mirror in my dress and stared at the bottle of champagne on the table. "Don't drink what your brother brings you tonight." My maid of honor, Claire, came back into the room and immediately started fixing a piece of my hair that had come loose. "You okay?" she said. "You look like you saw a ghost." I almost laughed. "I had a weird dream last night," I said. "Wedding jitters," she said. "Completely normal." I looked at the bottle. "My brother brought that," I said. "Oh, that's sweet," she said. "We'll open it for the toast." "Claire," I said, and something in my voice made her stop and look at me in the mirror. "Can I ask you something weird?" She put down the hairpin. "Obviously. Is there any way to test something, like a drink, before you drink it?" She stared at me for a long second. "What are you telling me right now?" she said. I told her about the dream. Claire is a nurse. She has been my best friend since we were 9 years old, and she's the kind of person who takes you seriously first and asks questions second. She didn't tell me I was being paranoid. She didn't tell me it was just wedding anxiety. She picked up the bottle and looked at it. "The seal looks intact," she said. "I know," I said. "That doesn't mean anything," she said. "You can reseal a bottle." She looked at me. "You know I have a basic tox kit in my car," she said. "I brought it because your cousin has a nut allergy and I wanted to be safe." "Go get it," I said. She handed me the bottle and walked out. I stood there holding it, feeling the cool glass against my palms. I thought about my brother sitting next to me at the hospital, holding our mother's hand. I thought about how he'd cried at the funeral. Real, ugly crying, the kind you can't fake. I thought about how our mother had left the house to both of us equally, and how Marcus had spent the last 18 months trying to get me to agree to sell it. I thought about the life insurance policy our mother had taken out on both of us when we were teenagers, $120,000 each, transferred to the surviving sibling in the event of death. I thought about how Marcus had gotten engaged 6 months ago to a woman who spent money the way most people breathe, and how he'd told me last month, laughing like it was a funny story, that they were, quote, a little underwater financially. I set the bottle down very carefully on the table. Claire came back with the kit. She was already snapping on a single latex glove. Okay, she said quietly. I'm going to open it and take a small sample. If there's anything in here that shouldn't be, some of the strips will catch it. Not everything, but the common ones. Okay, I said. She worked carefully. She'd done this before, not because she suspected her brother of poisoning her, but because she was Claire, and Claire prepared for everything. She eased the cork out, took a small amount in a clean vial she'd brought, and recorked the bottle. We waited. She used 3 different strips. The first one showed nothing. The second one showed nothing. The third one turned a color it was not supposed to turn. We both stared at it. What does that mean? I said. Claire's face had gone very still. She had her nurse face on, the one that meant she was not going to let her expression do anything until she'd thought carefully about what to do. It's flagging for a sedative compound, she said. Could be a few things. Could be enough to make you very, very sick. Could be enough to. She stopped. I need to get this to a proper lab. On my wedding day, I said. Yes, she said, on your wedding day. She looked at me. Sarah, she said. She is the only person who calls me by my full first name. I need you to keep it together right now. Can you do that? My mother had said the same thing to me the morning she told us her diagnosis. I need you to keep it together right now. Can you do that? Yes, I said. I walked down the aisle. I know how that sounds. I walked down the aisle with a bottle of potentially poisoned champagne sitting in my dressing room and my brother sitting in the front row with his smile and his fiancé's hand in his, and I walked down the aisle. Because my fiancé, Daniel, was standing at the end of it looking at me like I was the only thing he'd ever been sure of. And because Claire had already made 2 phone calls, one to a lab contact she knew personally, one to her cousin, who was a detective with the county. And because I understood that if I changed anything in the next 2 hours, Marcus would know something was wrong. So I smiled. And I walked. Daniel leaned toward me during the signing of the license and whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "I'll tell you everything tonight," I whispered back. He looked at me for a moment. He has known me long enough to understand that when I say I'll tell you everything, it is not a small thing. He gave the smallest nod and turned back to face the officiant. At the reception, Marcus came to me with 2 glasses and the bottle of champagne he'd brought. I watched him pour. He handed me a glass with that same easy smile, the one I'd grown up trusting. "To the bride," he said, raising his own glass. My glass was already switched. Claire had taken care of it before we sat down. My actual glass had plain sparkling water in it, brought by Daniel's mother, who'd been quietly let in on the situation. The glasses were identical. I raised mine and smiled at my brother. I watched him drink. I did not drink. "You seem happy," he said. "I am," I said. "Good," he said. And he hugged me and he kissed the side of my head and he smelled like the same cologne he'd worn since high school, and my chest ached with something I didn't have a word for. Claire's detective cousin James arrived at the reception venue at 6:40 p.m., not in uniform. He told the coordinator at the door that he was a late arriving guest. He sat at the bar. At 7:15, Claire got the call from the lab. She found me on the dance floor with Daniel. She touched my arm and I excused myself. We went to the hallway outside the restrooms where no one was standing. "Rohypnol," she said quietly. And one other compound the tech flagged as a muscle relaxant. Together, at the concentration they found. She paused. "He said that amount in a single glass of champagne, for someone your size, would cause respiratory depression, given the right circumstances, if no one noticed quickly enough. The hallway was very quiet. It could have looked like an accident, I said. Or a medical episode, Claire said. On the most chaotic day of your life, surrounded by people who weren't paying attention to anything except the celebration. Yes. I thought about my mother, standing at the kitchen table in her blue cardigan. Don't drink what your brother brings you tonight. Promise me. Okay, I said. James approached Marcus at 8:05 while the band was playing and Daniel's uncles were doing something embarrassing on the dance floor that everyone was watching. I was not watching Marcus when it happened. Claire had told me not to, had told me to stay on the floor and keep dancing and not look. But I felt it, the shift in the room's air, the way you feel a door open somewhere even when your back is turned to it. Daniel felt it too. His hand tightened slightly on my waist. I kept dancing. It was only when the song ended that I turned around. Marcus was gone from his table. His fiancée was sitting very still, staring at her phone, not looking at anyone. James was gone too. Daniel's mother brought me a glass of water and sat with me in a small room off the main hall, while Daniel stood outside the door, letting people know the bride needed a few minutes. I sat with my hands in my lap. My mother came to me in a dream, I said, to no one in particular. Daniel's mother. A woman who is known lost herself, who lost her own sister young. Reached over and took my hand. I know that sounds like, no, she said firmly. It doesn't sound like anything except a mother looking after her daughter. I looked at my wedding ring. I'd put it on 3 hours ago with Marcus standing 6 feet away. I keep trying to understand it, I said. What he was thinking. Whether he told himself a story about it, whether it felt justified somehow. Some people, she said carefully, stop being the person you knew long before you notice. The investigation took several weeks. I'm not going to walk through every detail of it because some of it is still ongoing, and because some of it I'm still trying to hold at arm's length while I figure out how to carry it. What I can tell you is what James told me, and Claire, and Daniel, sitting in our living room 11 days after the wedding. Marcus had taken out a life insurance policy on me 14 months earlier, without my knowledge. The kind that requires a signature, which meant he'd forged mine. Something that became apparent when investigators pulled the original paperwork and compared it to my actual signature on legal documents. The policy was for $200,000. He had debts I hadn't known about. Not just being a little underwater, not just a tight few months. Real debt, accumulated over years, owed to people who didn't send friendly reminder emails. He'd figured out that our mother's house, which we still jointly owned, couldn't be sold without my signature, and I told him clearly that I didn't want to sell. That was 18 months of him asking and me saying no. I was the obstacle. On my wedding day, with everyone distracted and celebrating, with a ready explanation for why the bride might feel unwell, with a fiancé who could testify that he'd never left her side, it had looked to him like a clean solution. James paused there and looked at me carefully. He's been charged, James said. Attempted homicide, forgery, a few other things that will come out. I looked at my hands. He cried at her funeral, I said. No one in the room said anything. Our mother, he cried. It didn't look fake. No, James said quietly. Probably wasn't. I have thought a lot about my mother since then. Not just about the dream, though I think about that too. I think about what it means that her voice was the one I heard, that whatever it was, my subconscious pulling from things I'd been half noticing and not letting myself fully think, or something I don't have a framework for, or something in between. It wore her face and used her words. Don't drink what your brother brings you tonight. Promise me. She spent her last years worrying about both of us. I remember her saying once, sitting at that kitchen table, in that blue cardigan, that her greatest fear wasn't dying, it was leaving and not being able to take care of us anymore. I think she found a way. I don't need anyone to agree with me about that. I'm not asking anyone to. It's just what I know when I sit with it quietly. Daniel and I moved into a new apartment in March, one with no connection to any of this. We spent 2 weekends painting the living room a color that took us 4 samples to agree on. We have a small kitchen table that doesn't have any burn marks on it yet. Some mornings I wake up early and just lie there watching the light change, feeling the strange, specific weight of being alive when I might not have been. I think about my mother. I think about the blue cardigan. I say thank you, quietly, to the ceiling. The house, my mother's house, is still standing. I kept it. I'm not selling it. I go there sometimes, just to sit at the kitchen table. I always make my own coffee when I'm there. And I'm careful now about what I drink when I didn't pour it myself. Not out of fear, just out of respect for the woman who came back one last time to make sure I'd be okay. I've thought a lot about what it means that I'm still here, not in the dramatic way, just quietly, in the early mornings when I'm making coffee and the apartment is still, and Daniel is still asleep and I'm standing at the counter thinking about nothing in particular, and then suddenly thinking about everything. There's a version of that day where I didn't listen, where I told myself it was just a dream and poured the champagne and laughed and said cheers to my brother across a table covered in flowers. I think about that version sometimes. I don't let myself stay there long. What I've come to understand is that the choices Marcus made didn't begin the night before my wedding. They began much earlier, in every small moment when he chose his own comfort over honesty, when he let a debt grow instead of asking for help, when he looked at his sister and saw a problem to solve instead of a person to love. What happened between us wasn't sudden. It was the final destination of 100 smaller decisions I never saw him make. And my choice, to listen, to pause, to take the dream seriously even when it would have been so much easier to dismiss it, that didn't begin that morning either. It began every time I paid attention to something I couldn't fully explain. Every time I trusted the part of myself that knew something was wrong before my mind could name it. Every time I chose to be careful with my own life. I think that's what people don't talk about enough. Intelligence isn't just what you know, it's what you're willing to notice. It's the willingness to look at something uncomfortable and stay with it instead of looking away. Marcus was smart. He had planned carefully. But somewhere along the way he had stopped noticing what his choices were turning him into. That blindness, the kind that comes from wanting something badly enough to stop questioning yourself, is one of the most dangerous things a person can carry. Courage is quieter than people think. It isn't always the dramatic moment. Sometimes it's staying calm in a room full of flowers and music, while your whole understanding of someone you love is rearranging itself. Sometimes it's dancing when everything inside you wants to run. Sometimes it's trusting a feeling so old and so deep you can't source it and acting on it anyway. What I know now is that survival isn't passive. I survived that day because someone loved me enough to show up, in whatever form that took, and because I was willing to listen. Because Claire was willing to act. Because Daniel was willing to trust me without needing an explanation in the moment. Survival. Real survival is something people build together. I kept my mother's house. I sit at her kitchen table sometimes and I feel the particular silence of a place that remembers someone. I don't need to explain what that is or defend it to anyone. What I carry forward is simpler than I expected. Pay attention to the people around you, not just what they say, but what they do when they think the stakes are low. Notice what someone wants badly enough to stop being honest about. And when the part of you that loves someone most clearly tells you something is wrong, don't argue with it. That instinct has been kept alive in you by everyone who ever loved you and is no longer here. It's worth listening to.